the beginning of this year, 2022, I did a video where I captured my hopes, my fears, and just some questions I had about how this year would play out in watches. Given that we're now at the end of 2022, I figured it was a good opportunity to go back, look at those hopes, fears, questions, and see how did things pan out. Hi, I'm Pete McConville. Welcome to my channel where I think about, talk about, and just generally geek out on watches. If that sounds like something that you're interested in, then like, subscribe, do all that sort of stuff, and we'll see more of each other. So today, as I said, I'm going back through my earlier hopes and fears and questions about how I thought 2022 might pan out in the world of wristwatches. And here we go, and I'll start with my hopes. My first hope was that we would establish a new normal. Ever since COVID in 2020, it's been uncertain about what is the state of the industry. Where are we going? What's a good deal? What's a bad deal? Should I be getting a discount? Shouldn't I be getting a discount? Is this brand doing well or is this brand doing poorly? And through 2020, that was clearly such a disrupted year that couldn't be trusted. 2021 had some bizarre spikes going on that was unsure if that was going to continue forever. But I think now at the end of 2022, we're able to say this is where things are at. You know, if I can get a discount now, or if I can't get one, that is how things will be. If, you know, the massive weird spike on a couple of hype watches has kind of gone away, and if you draw a line from prices 2018, 2019, and then up to 2022, jumping 2020 and 2021, everything starts to make sense. So I think it is fair to say that now at the end of 2022, we can be confident that all of the disruptions of COVID and the supply chains upsets and all that sort of stuff have washed through the system. Not saying it's completely stable, not saying nothing's going to change, but rather now we're in a kind of normal environment where normal watch rules would apply. Okay, so my next hope was that we would get more and better watch shows. I had felt that in the post-COVID world, particularly in the post-Basel world collapse and COVID world, that the excitement, the buzz, the energy that those watch shows generated was lacking, was missing. And I was really hoping that when we could start getting back together again, when journalists could start going to watch shows, that would be reflected in their coverage and their comms to us. And I don't think that's been satisfied. I don't think that we still, whether it's us engaging directly with the watch show websites and the material they're making available online, or whether it's us consuming the material that journalists are creating for us to consume, I'm just still not getting the energy, the buzz, the excitement, the joy that we used to get from the old watch shows. And so I don't think that we have replaced Basel World or those shows just yet. Okay, my third hope for the year was that we would see a growing diversity in the watches, the brands, the genres being covered by watch media. And I think that's kind of been borne out. I think that's kind of happening. If you went back 3 years ago, I reckon probably well over half the coverage of watches probably came down to maybe 4 or 5 brands. Rolex, Omega, Tudor, AP, and Patek was probably half the articles written by most outlets. I think we have moved on from there. I think that we see far more watches being discussed across the whole media spectrum. Are we at some nirvana where, if a watch constitutes maybe 10% of sales, it gets maybe 10% of coverage? Absolutely not. Brands that get maybe 10% of sales may still be getting 30% of the media coverage, but fundamentally that's your fault, not the media outlets. They are whether it's Hodinkee or Worn and Wound or Fratello, etc., they're all driven by analytics. They're driven by what you choose to click on. And unfortunately, consumers are still tending to click on clickbaity brands. You are continuing to choose to watch more Rolex, more AP, more Patek, more Tudor videos than you are videos about other brands. And so it's really your fault that that's what the media does. I'm hoping that we as a community continue to mature, that we as consumers continue to seek out things that are more interesting, and that lures media companies to be more interesting. I feel that's occurring. It's just very slow, and I wouldn't pretend we're there yet. My fourth hope and final hope for the year was that we would see a greater diversity of media. That I fear that a lot of the big established brands in watch media had kind of found their niche, were digging themselves in, doing that, and there was nothing much new happening. And I was really hoping that someone new and interesting would come along. And I fear that that did not happen. What we've got is some pretty good brands. As much as I've been critical of Hodinkee, their writing is solid. It's moving away from what I'm interested in, but it's not terrible. Fratello is great. Monochrome is great. SJX is good at what they do. Revolution is good at what they do. Worn and Wound is good at what they do. But there's the thing. Each of those sort of mastheads has come up with their little formula, and that's pretty much all they're doing. And no new media has come along to fill the gaps, to hit the areas that they don't hit. And I feel like, I don't know, it's just, I found myself disengaging from media because it's almost like I know what they're going to say before I've read the article. And I'm really looking forward to someone coming in and saying something I haven't heard before, giving an insight that I wouldn't have just stumbled upon myself, and just not being so bloody agreeable and predictable. Okay, so now we get into my fears for this year. Fear number one was that the trend of small watches would kill big watches and leave people like me with nothing to buy. Thankfully, that fear has not been realized. Yes, there are more small watches, 36, 37, 38 mil watches being produced. What I have found is that the people making small watches tend to be making those small watches based on mid-century modern 1950s, 1960s design cues, which are frankly not in my wheelhouse anyway. So in a way, this is terribly selfish from me. This is very much driven by what I'm concerned about. But yeah, what I would say is those people who have tended to make retro watches, and retro in a very narrow time period, aimed at a very specific kind of watch consumer, have made smaller watches. But those companies which make a much broader range of watches, which make some more contemporary pieces, or which make pieces that go back prior to the sort of mid-century modern 50s, 60s era, are continuing to make bigger watches, are continuing to provide options above 37, 38 millimeters. And so I think, what we're seeing is a couple of brands that have really picked up on that fashion of small watches going that way. But for large companies that are looking after a large mainstream audience, thankfully, we're continuing to get, we'll call them big watches made. Okay, so my second fear was, and this is, remember, at the end of 2021, I had these fears, that the investment contagion would spread beyond the established hype brands of AP, Patek, and Rolex. That this concept that watches needed to have a return on investment, and they had to be hard to buy, and that supply had to be restricted artificially, would spread to other brands, and that we collectors that didn't like the hype brands would get sucked into that disease. Thankfully, that boil has been lanced, that pus has been excreted, that bubble has been popped, and not only did the hype, the extreme, out of control, infectious, pustulant hype of the APs and Pateks and Rolex largely be punctured and the pus released, that has not spread to other brands. And the rest of us are still able to access the watches that we want at reasonable prices and without having to play stupid games with ADs. Okay, some things I was curious about. The first one was, had Rolex topped out? For the last couple of years, looking at the Morgan Stanley World Cup of Watches sort of thing, I was curious about, had Rolex achieved all it could? My thinking here was that Rolex has made it absolutely clear it's not going to make a radical expansion to the number of watches that it makes, and Rolex had not been making significant price rises. Therefore, if you don't make more watches and you don't raise the price of your watches, then you've kind of hit your maximum capacity for income. And especially in a world where there is growth, if you're not growing, you're shrinking. So my question was, what was going to happen with Rolex? What we saw was Rolex have not topped out. That what Rolex would appear to be is that over this year, they have managed to shift a lot of their supply away from steel and into precious metals. So if you look at as I said, those Morgan Stanley numbers, you'll find that yes, Rolex has increased the number of watches they sell a bit. They went from like 800,000 to just under 1 million. But more importantly, they massively increased the average price of their watches. And they didn't do that by increasing the actual MSRPs. Because if you go back and look, you'll see that there have been increases, but not that significant. What I think they've done is they've been able to leverage a lot of the crazy hype that was being generated over the last couple of years to entice people to buy more two-tone and more gold in order to get the steel watches. And that's driven their overall income and market share up. So Rolex had not topped out. It's going to be a question for next year. Can that continue? And what's going to happen in that space? My second question was, will brands maintain that COVID-found discipline in production and distribution? Or would they go back to the pre-COVID days of just churning out as many watches as they can, dumping as much of that inventory as they can to sellers, building up potentially excess inventory, getting back to dumping to Joma Shop and us getting massive discounts? And I think the jury is in now. No, brands have definitely learnt their lesson. They seem to be really maintaining that COVID discipline. If you look at pretty much any of the big grey market sellers, the cupboards are very, very bare. There is very little new stock for most brands. You might get like art SKU here and art SKU there, but really that's it. It looks like in the aftermath of COVID, brands that worked out they can make more money by selling less watches are continuing to make more money by selling less watches. Okay, so my final question for 2022 was, would the collapse of entry-level Swiss watches continue? This is a mixed story. In general, yes. If you look at the FH numbers, what you would see is that the Federation Horologie Swiss export numbers, you would see that at the very bottom end, the value of entry-level Swiss watches has continued to fall. Except at the very bottom end, the very cheap watches, they seem to have stabilized. What's going on? I think that can be summed up in one word: Moonswatch. That watch has changed the shape of the industry at the bottom end of the Swiss market. It's changed that dynamic and dragged new money into what was a completely failing part of the ecosystem. It'll be fascinating to see in 2023 if that can continue, but I'll talk about that more in my hopes, fears, and questions video for next year that I'll do soon. So anyway, that's my thoughts. That's where I sort of look back at 2023, 2022, and what I think has and hasn't happened. Interested in your ideas. What do you think? What did you hope for and was it found? What were you fearing? Did it come to pass? What were you curious about? And maybe tell me the same for next year. What do you fear for 2023? What do you hope for in 2023? And what are you just curious about? I've been Pete McConville. This is my channel where I do this sort of stuff and just shoot the breeze about watches. Interested in your ideas, leave them in the comments below. If you're interested in this, like, subscribe, do all that good YouTube stuff, and I will see you later. Bye.